Get ready for a new episode of The Perspective with Mike Sherbino and Julie Stautland, where we take a look at not only the serious side of life, but the funny, fun, and joyful sides too. Well, most of us can only dream of leaving a lasting legacy in this world, one that shares God's love and one that keeps growing long after we've moved on to glory. For Girls Like You, the magazine and organization was created by Winter Pitts out of her desire for her 4 daughters and other girls and tweens to blossom into their God-given rightful places. Winter Pitts wrote more than 7 books before she died unexpectedly in 2018. Her legacy continues with the precious resources for girls. And now, Winter's beloved husband, Jonathan Pitts, and their daughters carry on to help young girls become God's daughters and who they were meant to be. And just before we begin this beautiful story, here's Mike and Julie to brighten your day.
Welcome again today to The Perspective. Glad you're with us. And as always, I like to test Julie with skill testing questions.
Oh boy.
And I'm going to do it again today, but this is more of a serious one, okay?
Okay.
I'm not going to be concerned if you like double chocolate fudge cake or whatever it was. A friend. Let's talk about friends for a moment.
Okay.
Friends are key. It's an incredible gift.
Yes.
Do you ever have a friend that's come alongside you in a difficult time?
You know, I've had the pleasure of having more than one friend, but one in particular I've seen walk such a tough journey of dealing with physical pain. And when I've had my own issues for so many years, I really saw how they were able to keep their joy in the midst of their pain. And they were such an inspiration and an encouragement to me when I would find that my physical pain was overwhelming and I was losing my joy at times.
Yeah.
So how about you?
Well, you know, when I think about what you shared, those people really invested a lot of time.
Yes.
And we don't think about it because we're just immersed in our own pain.
That's true.
I think when I was a young guy, there was a man named Bob Wright, and he would always call me Michael, my hero. And I thought he was nuts, but I resonated with that on dark days.
Yeah.
And then I jump ahead about 20 years, and I went through a really difficult time in ministry. And there was a man named Dr. John Radford, and he made himself available just to be with me and my family whenever we needed. It was a gift for about 7 or 8 years. It's remarkable.
That's so important.
Yeah, and then I've had a neat gift right now. And I was reminded of it this morning when I was journaling. And I said, God, what's one thing you want me to thank you for? And he's been on the program before, but it's my brother David.
Yes.
Because we were apart for 30 years on different sides of the country ministering. And we've been able to hang together and do all sorts of stupid things that brothers do.
See, that's cool.
Yeah, it's an incredible gift. And I don't know if you have the gift of a friend. I hope you do. But don't take it for granted. Something to really be thankful for. Today on the program, we're going to talk to Jonathan Pitts. And as Jonathan shares his story, you're going to realize why it's so important to have friends stand with you and to walk with you. But I know that his story is going to give you encouragement.
Yes.
It's going to give you insight into that difficult subject that's called death.
Seasons come and go, but Jonathan discovered that winter seemed to leave too soon. When Jonathan Pitts took his wife of 15 years into his arms for their anniversary dance, he had no idea that within a month, he would be on a completely different journey, navigating life after Winter's sudden death at the age of 38.
And Julie, I am so glad that Jonathan can be with us today. Interesting as you talk about the seasons, his wife's name was Winter.
I know.
And a very interesting name as we talk about the winter season, the bleakness, the dark side of life. Jonathan, welcome to the program today. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, glad to be with you.
And your wife was a prolific writer. You're also an author, and you are a pastor at Church of the City in Nashville. And I'm looking to come to Nashville. We got to meet and go out for lunch, but thank you for being here today.
Yeah, I would love it. We got good food here, so when you're here, we'll take you somewhere good.
That's what I've heard. Jonathan, take us back to the story of your romance with your wife, Winter.
Yeah, well, Winter and I met in, it would have been the fall of 2001, right after 9/11 happened. I'll never forget that season because it was a bleak season. And so in the middle of like a really bleak season, I was in college, a junior. I would meet her at a party. And honestly, from the very moment I met her, I knew that she was going to be a special girl in my life. And a couple weeks later, I knew that I was going to marry her. And 7 months later, we were engaged. And a year after that, we were married, 2 weeks after we graduated from college. And we'd start a journey together. And we would, honestly go on a journey we never thought we'd be on. We started in New Jersey, where I grew up. And we found ourselves a year and a half later in Dallas, Texas. And I would actually become a part of her family, the Evans family. Some of your viewers might know Tony Evans. Well, I kind of fell into life with the Evans family, and sorry, I've got family like walking around the house. I fell into the Evans family and would really do 14 years of life with this family up close and personal. Winter became an author. She started a magazine called For Girls Like You. I would jump into ministry with the Evanses. I would be an executive director and a pastor for Dr. Tony Evans. And we had this life in Dallas for 14 years that was rich and beautiful as we raised our 4 girls. And we really finished a season of life, 14 years of beautiful life in Dallas, Texas, and raising our girls, and felt a call to Nashville. There's a church that was looking for an executive pastor. And so I would actually feel called to that role. And at the same time, Winter was in publishing. She had a magazine that she was doing and publishing books. And we thought, wow, what a strategic place to be, Nashville, Tennessee. It's kind of really a home of a lot of ministry. And so we would basically June 10th, 2018, we'd buy our new home in Franklin, Tennessee. We'd put our girls in school a couple of days later, and then we'd move into our house. And we left about 4 days later. And when we left, we went to Iowa for a vacation for a week with my family in Iowa, like a family reunion. Then we'd go back to Texas for my last week of work. And it would be there. And suddenly, as I'm saying these words, that Winter would really breathe her last breath. She was taking a nap. And while she was taking her nap, she would experience she'd experience a cardiac dysrhythmia. Her heart would get off rhythm. And what I would say is like the most peaceful transition of her life ever, from earth into eternity, would be the most chaotic transition of mine. And for my girls, we'd in a matter of minutes, my girls and I were all dealing with the reality of Winter being gone and into eternity. And so the last couple of years, or a couple of years after her passing, the first couple of years were obviously really traumatic and full of a lot of grief. And honestly, it was in that season that I would find the comfort of the Lord in a way I'd never known it before. And now what's really beautiful is not only am I able to comfort others with the comfort that I've received from the Lord, but also I get a new journey. And so I recently got married and finding myself now blending a family, which I never thought I'd be a part of. It's a whole new journey, which comes with its own challenges and difficulties, and also beauties, and a real redemption in my life. And
it's amazing to see that, none of us knows what's ahead of us. None of us knows the journey that God has planned for us. And yet, if we are willing to trust Him, we can see Him weave such incredible beauty through all our pain. And I see that in your life. And I'm so thankful that you are moving forward, and that your family's moving forward, and that you're able to continue to share that and spill such hope and encouragement into so many other people's lives. And from that, I just want to go on and say that I know that Winter started the Girls magazine. If you could tell us a little bit more about that back in 2012, and how that's continuing on today and the impact that it's having.
Yeah, I'll never forget one day Winter told me, she said, I feel like I'm supposed to create a resource for girls. There's not enough resources. Our oldest daughter at the time was 7 years old, and it was either mommy and me, like baby kind of stuff, or teenage stuff. And she said, I feel like there's a hole here. And I'm going to start creating a resource. She didn't know it was a magazine at the time. It was like just a little resource she was working on. And I was like, well, why don't you just do hair? You can make a couple $100 a head and help us financially. And she was home with the girls at that point. And to be honest, I didn't really believe in this vision that God had given her. But over the course of the next call it 7 years, she would develop this wonderful magazine for tween girls, subscription magazine called For Girls Like You, that began to thrive. And I would become like this guy in the background helping her out administratively. And ironically, it's a ministry that she got to launch as a visionary. And now me as an executor and a manager, I still run. The day that she died, there were about 1,200 subscribers, and now we've got almost 6,000 subscribers, and we've got some in Canada, we've got some all over the English-speaking world. But it's been a beautiful legacy that she left and that I get to continue to be a part of, which I'm really grateful for. So,
You know, Jonathan, let me interject because you're talking about your wife's legacy. You're the dad, you and your wife, you have 4 daughters, and we were joking before we came on air that I've got you beat. I have 5 daughters. I also have 3 granddaughters, and there's not a guy in sight except for me and you. You took the lead in an interesting way when your wife was passing away and you knew that she was going, and then even as she had died, it was through worship music. And I want you to tell us, why did worship music play a big part of those final moments? You actually were singing as well. Can you unpack that story for our listeners? Because I'm touched by that, because that's been part of my own journey, that there are moments when you have to sing, and it seems almost strange for guys to talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's the importance of worship in general. Like, we don't realize as we're rehearsing, like Sunday in, Sunday out, or as we drive in our cars, as we worship the Lord, like we're really rehearsing, I think, for moments where we have nothing else. And so I found myself, we had gone to the emergency room, and my girls were waiting in the waiting room with some family that had already arrived. And I found myself pacing back and forth in the emergency room. And the doctor walked out and said, "Hey, we had a pulse. We don't have one now. And we think you ought to come say goodbye to your wife." And I've shared this story a lot, so sometimes I get emotional, sometimes I don't. But the reality is I walked into that room with no words. I had nothing to say, didn't know how to respond. On one side of my brain, I'm praying for a miracle. On the other side of my brain, I'm an Eagle Scout. I kind of know how this goes. You've not breathed for 25 minutes. You're brain dead, at least if you're not gone. And so I walked in that room prepared to say goodbye to my wife, but with no words. And so I just began. I knelt down. I'll never forget. I knelt down by her side, and I just kind of put my cheek, tears flowing down my eyes to her cheek. And I just began to sing, "It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out a praise, pour out a praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out a praise to you only. Great are you, God." And I just sang that because I had no words, and I didn't have even any articulation for what was happening in that moment. But looking back at it, I feel like what was happening is I was reminding her of where she was going and reminding myself of who I could trust. And ironically, it's kind of crazy, but I would actually write that in my book, in my winter season. And as God would have it, the guy who wrote that song, his name is David Leonard, goes to my church and has led worship in my church. And I had to reach out to him to get basically just to get permission to use the song, and would end up meeting up with him for coffee. And it's just funny how God works and how he brings stuff to your heart and then also connects it in a way where it's nobody else but him. And so, worship met me in a moment where I had nothing else, which means God met me in a moment where I had nothing else. Because at the end of the day, that's really all we have. That's what we'll do in heaven. We'll worship him. We'll be with him.
You're so right. You're so right. Well, listen, we have to take a break, but we're going to be right back. This is so powerful. Stay with us.
My relationship with my world. Dear God, thank you for sharing your love with me, and thank you for the gift of salvation. Help me to share the message of love and salvation with others, beginning with my friends. Please remind me that I can't change anyone, but I can show them what it means to walk with Jesus. I can do this through my words and my actions. Please let my love for others be the strongest evidence of your goodness in my life.
Well, I'm so glad that Jonathan Pitts is with us, and he's written the book called My Winter Season. I want to encourage you to get a hold of that book because it will be food for your soul. Yes. Jonathan, when you lose your wife, and I can't imagine what that is like. I've lost many other people close, and as a pastor, of course, I've officiated numerous funerals. It's always difficult. But how did your children navigate all through this? And we've just heard from your daughter, Alina, in the short clip. She's got an incredible musical gift, but unpack us a little bit about the journey you continue to be on, helping your kids move on from the passing of their mom.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would say that I've really discovered probably over the last 2 years specifically, especially as I've moved into new relationship and gotten married, one of the things I always said is I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for this. And that's the only anger I ever felt, is when I realized that there's things now that happen in my life based on what's happened to me that I can't control. And I would say the thing I realized is that I'll always be a dad leading 4 girls who lost their mom. It doesn't matter their age, doesn't matter where we're at. Could be their graduations, could be their weddings, could be the birth of their babies, like important milestones and regular life. I'll always be a dad leading through grief, and there'll always be girls who have lost their mom. Which doesn't mean there's no hope. It doesn't even mean that life isn't good, because it is, but it does mean there are some particular things that they'll walk through and I'll walk through that we really have to just be patient with ourselves in. I would say from the very beginning, I'm grateful that we had a foundation of faith, because at the end of the day, the Bible says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So the first thing I said when I walked into that waiting room after saying goodbye to my now late wife was tell my girls, like, hey, Mommy just went home to be with Jesus. It's the only thing I could say that was both true and hopeful. Right. And so we continue to remember that, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. We continue to talk about the fact that Mommy is with Jesus. She's also in their great cloud of witnesses, which means that she's advocating for them from heaven with Jesus, which is kind of cool if you read Hebrews. But at the end of the day, it's a continued journey of realizing that redemption is necessary because life is broken and the world is broken, and their mom isn't here because the world is broken. For whatever reason, God didn't stop it. And for whatever reason, it's a journey God's called them to walk through. And it's a part of their suffering on this earth that is not fun for Dad. And so, or for them, obviously, way more for them. So anyway, they've done really well. My girls are survivors. They are incredibly gifted, incredibly kind, incredibly trusting in the Lord, but they're also regular girls. And so they've dealt with things in their own way. They're all different. And so they deal with things. They all experience emotions differently. They all experience change differently. And so, it was one season of like me being by myself, which was really short. And then another season where my oldest sister moved in with me and became like a surrogate mom for my girls for a couple of years and continues to operate that role to a degree. And then on top of that, I got married recently, and in my new marriage, that's a whole nother change for the family, which comes with its own processes. And it's something I've never even thought about doing. And now I've walked into it. My now wife, Peta, has walked into it, and the girls have walked into it. And so we all just continue to try to be as gracious as we can as we walk through something we never thought we'd walk through. None of us, And so, but they're doing well. My oldest is graduated, and she's heading to Europe for the summer, doing some fun stuff. Following her mommy's footsteps. Her mom went to Europe a couple times, and my other girls are loving school, and they're all doing really well. And they're all, gifted in lots of different ways. I watched them both grapple with their loss, but then also watch God make beauty of ashes. So it's been, I don't know. I would never ask for our journey, but I also don't. I don't have anything but hope about our journey as well. So.
Well, and your family as a whole. I briefly, spent time with Tony and Lois when I was part of the NRB, and was with Lois, not too long before her passing as well. The whole Evans family has gone through a lot. So you as a family and your girls have your own personal, but your extended family as well. And you talk about the fact about being resilient and leaning on others, but also how you find that your resilience on God, and maybe unpack that a little bit more, how, it's been such a big thing for all of you, how you've been relying on God, and how people have spoken and been there for you as well, if you can share a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, our family walked through the loss of, I believe it was 6 family members within an 18-month period.
It's just crazy.
Including Dr. Tony Evans' wife, his dad, my wife, who's his niece, his brother, a sister-in-law. I mean, it's just crazy what we walked through. And I don't know. So, it's interesting. You think about, I think it's 2 Corinthians 1, where it talks about that verse where it talks about God comforts us, and then we give out that same comfort that we receive. It also talks about that basically all of us are going to be appointed some level of suffering. And it basically says the sufferings of Christ overflow to us. But as the sufferings of Christ overflow to us, so does the comfort of Christ flow through us.
Yes, and, so important to add that. That's fabulous. It's
a beautiful verse, because what that verse tells me is to expect that there's going to be really uncomfortable things. And the only one that'll bring you comfort in those uncomfortable things is the Comforter, the Holy Spirit. And then he'll also use you to bring comfort. And so what's really been beautiful about our story is even the Evans family just wrote a book about the loss of Lois, and really loss in general that season. And they're giving people comfort. We're giving people comfort in ways that wouldn't have been possible in the ministry that God had given us before. And then we walk through this season of immense pain and loss, and we don't understand it all, but somehow, some way, God is working all things together for good. And Lois is in eternity with the Lord, and Winter is in eternity with the Lord, and our family is in eternity with the Lord, celebrating together. And we don't get it now, but we have glimpses through Scripture, and Scripture doesn't lie to us. It doesn't tell us to expect everything to be great. It tells us to expect suffering and tells us to expect loss, and it actually gives us a path forward and how to deal with the reality of what this world throws at us. So anyway, it's been really beautiful, and it's been an honor, one of the great honors of my life, to walk with all of the Evans family, who are still my family, even though I married into it. I see most of them, a couple times a quarter at least. And when they come to Nashville, they come to my house. When I go to Dallas, I'll see them. We're doing a graduation combined party with a couple of our kids together in a couple of weeks here. And so, it's a great joy to walk with the Evans family. So.
Jonathan, we just have a minute left today, although we could really take another couple hours. Help us, our viewers, to process a difficult question. Maybe, and I know it's hard to do it in a minute. In your book, you write, yes, God is that good. He redeems our tragedy and failures, and his promises are beyond our imagination. I know you've already touched on it, but if you were to talk to one person today who's in the grip of pain because of a loss, what would be the one word you'd want to leave with them?
Yeah, it's hard to give one word because everyone's different. But the thing I thought about that came to mind for me is I think about Job, who walked through as much family pain and difficulty and loss as I've walked through, actually more than that. And Job has these words. He says, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And that is the story and the journey of faith, is no matter what we walk through, it's trusting and coming to realize that God is that good. See, for me, that was an axiom that I knew cognitively with my mind, that I would experience much more experientially in the loss of Winter. Like when Winter left this world, there was a ton of pain, but there was a lot of beauty that came out of that, and beauty that still continues to come. And so me saying God is that good is me experientially saying, I haven't been slain. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. All this stuff I've walked through, it's not been anywhere near as much as Job. I've seen God be really good and faithful to me through it. And I trust that he's good and faithful to Winter, because she's in a place that's better than I'll ever be until I pass from this earth, just like she did. But I would just say, just continue to trust that though he slay you, yet will you trust him. Just continue to trust that he is good. And I promise you will experience that. That's not just something God tells us, but eventually we will experience that goodness if we trust him. And so I'm just one guy who's experienced that. Even in the middle of loss, even in the middle of my darkest days, God showed up for me. And the last thing I'll say, Psalm 34:7 is a verse that's been a life verse for me lately, which is, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he rescues them. And so my story is one of rescue, but I hope if you're in the middle of that darkness right now, maybe we'll give you hope, some joyful expectation of a better tomorrow, because I've experienced it and I can speak to it. God really is that good.
Jonathan, I just want to say thank you for giving of yourself and being transparent today, coming on the program. Folks, you've been listening to Jonathan Pitts, who's written a book called My Winter Season. I want to encourage you all to get a copy of the book, because you likely, if you don't need it today, you have a friend who does. Jonathan, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, God bless you guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back with Mike and the Word.
Prayer is not just about asking God to do what we want him to do or give us what we want him to give us. It's really a way for God to show us what he wants, including all the amazing plans he has for our lives. This means that praying is not just about you and me talking to God. It's also about us listening to him with our hearts. If I asked you, when do you pray? You might say, I pray when my parents tell me to, I pray when I do something wrong, I pray when I need help, and I pray before I eat.
As we're trying to process everything that we've heard today, we're coming back to the final teach that I want to give to you on the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are all about how is it that we experience God's happiness. Well, it seems that we've been talking about things that create incredible sadness, the loss of a life. But as we process that, what I believe is tantamount for all of us as we think about the legacy that we want to leave behind us, it impacts how we choose to live today. Because we never know when we're going to take our last breath, do we? And many of you have lived with the notion, I'm self-secure in who I am. I'm going to press on. I got lots of time down the road. I'll deal with the other stuff later. The time to deal with the other stuff is right now. And let me tell you what that stuff is. It's relationships. Relationships are key. Relationships are priority. God is concerned, first of all, about our relationship with Him. That's why He's given us Jesus to be our Savior and Lord, so that we can be right with Him. And if we claim to be a follower of Jesus, He tells us that His Spirit will dwell within us, and it'll impact the way that we choose to live. So when Jesus was talking on the hillside outside of Jerusalem to the people in what is called the Sermon on the Mount, He said this, "Happy are those who are merciful to others, for they will be shown mercy." He also said, "Happy are those who work for peace, for they will be the sons of God." That teaching really flew in the face of the culture of that day, because the idea of being merciful was actually considered to be a weakness. You weren't a real man if you were merciful. No, you'd be tough and strong, and you never give in. And the last thing you want to be is a peacemaker, because it was always about your right and pushing your agenda. That sounds almost a harsh thing to make that comparison to today. But oftentimes in our very narcissistic society, the way that we choose to live really symbolizes the way that people were living then. As a matter of fact, there's not a whole lot of difference, if anything. And Jesus comes, and in the midst of that, He is the fly in the ointment. He is the one that wants to turn the tables upside down. And He invites us to be merciful. He invites us to be peacemakers. What is merciful? Well, let me think about the word mercy. Mercy is the stuff that takes the friction out of life. Mercy is anything that you and I do that is a benefit to someone in need. It is sympathy and compassion in action together. And it's infinitely bigger than forgiveness. Say, what? Is that true? Mercy is bigger than forgiveness? Listen to what the psalmist said in Psalm 119, verse 64. He says, "The earth, O Lord, is full of your mercy." God has shown mercy to you and I, and He calls us to show that to other people in our relationships. Maybe there's people that you've been holding a grudge against. It's time to let go of that. It's time to extend His mercy. Don't come to the end of your life and not have dealt with the stuff that really matters. And that stuff is relationships. And we're also invited to be peacemakers. I wrote down a while ago that people are crying for peace, and the pieces of their lives are crying for a peacemaker to piece them back together again. You see, peacemakers are committed to at least two different tasks. It's introducing others to the living God, who is the Prince of Peace, and it's helping other people make peace amongst themselves. We see that with the United Nations. We see that with peacekeepers. But God has called you and I at a very practical level of dealing one-on-one, whether with your spouse, with your children, with your relatives, with the people that you work with, to do everything you can to be at peace with people. And many times that only will happen as you extend mercy. Just as God has extended mercy to us, He invites you to do that to other people. This is a radical way of living, but it is the way that God calls us to live, the way that we experience His life, His presence, and His joy. It's time to be happy.